Hi everyone, this is Temmi, and today we're going to talk about some of the divine beings in Pantheon, Rise of the Fallen, and the myths surrounding them. Here's a huge shout out to Jameis for working with me on this video, and for all of his other great lore work for the game. Remember that most of the races on Terminus were originally from other planets, and when they were pulled onto Terminus, their deities came with them. Because of this, instead of having one cohesive pantheon of gods, we have many from different planets, and of course, we really don't know as much as I would like. Let's start our discussion with the Celestials native to Terminus. What forces are at work that steal entire races and their gods from other planets and bring them to Terminus? The assumption currently is that it has more to do with Terminus and less to do with the other planets. We don't know much about this, and this is probably the biggest question that we're left to ponder from the lore we have thus far. Is this the work of a sentient creature, so many times more powerful than even the gods of other planets that he may enact his desires at whim? Is this the doing of the forces of nature of Terminus, without true thought or presence and simply a side effect of the world existing? Could a mortal possibly be the one behind this? Clearly, there are quite a few questions about Terminus in ancient times, and the divines that may or may not have existed then. Unfortunately, we don't have answers to most of these questions, but we can infer two things. One, that the native divines, or perhaps even a singular divine, quite probably struck the dragon accord with Rock Nilfamos following his ascension to the dragon throne. Disclaimer, this is not entirely confirmed, but it is a decently safe assumption. And two, that they or their underlings are likely the ones who enforce the dragon accord. Sadly, that's about the extent of what we know and our decently safe inferences. We don't know what Terminus native deities looked like, what their capabilities were, or motives, or really much else. Our next stop is with the dragons. The ancient dragons of Terminus aren't true celestial beings, but they're worth an honorable mention due to their role in the dragon accord and their godlike strength. Ostensibly, they helped in the creation of the celestial boundary, which greatly dictates the action of the divines in relation to the mortals of Terminus. The mortal dwarves have perhaps the closest relationship to their deities of all the races on Terminus, and as such, we have perhaps the most information about the Dwarven Pantheon. The Dwarven Pantheon is a triumvirate of the gods Khazis, Razak, and Lockenhammer. All three of these gods chose to descend from immortality to become high mortals. Khazis, the creator of the dwarves, loved his creations dearly on their home planet of Oldasa. It is said he crafted them in his image and stayed and lived with them for many days after their creation. Once on Terminus, the celestial boundary prevented this type of interaction, but when the creator realized he could forsake his immortality to reign among his beloved race, he descended and taught the dwarves to forge cold dark steel from ice and stone in similar fashion to how he had created them originally. Razak the Rageful had always longed to vie against Khazis, though he was ever prevented from this by the balance of Lockenhammer on Oldasa. However, once upon Terminus, the old laws were no longer upheld, and Razak made an attempt to destroy the Dwarven race. Lockenhammer was also no longer bound by Oldasan law, and thus forcibly descended Razak to the state of High Mortal and imprisoned him for 1,000 years in the wintry tenebrous tundra as punishment. A cult called the Zealots of Ra sprung up in the wake of this event. Little else is known of Lockenhammer, except that he had descended and is a high mortal. His whereabouts and doings are a mystery. The elves are known to have at least two deities presiding over them, Aeolos and Deity. To summarize the events on their home planet as succinctly as possible, all I will say is that due to a civil war, the elves were led to a valley wherein they were sheltered by a giant tree they called Lumos. The destruction followed them and consumed the elves and their tree, and it is shortly after this that they were deposited upon Terminus. Near the end of the elves' time on Seolane, they were given a twofold prophecy by Aeolos, which spoke vaguely of the Lumos tree and 3 infernos. Deity extracted the heart seed from the dying Lumos to give to his people so that they may replant their tree, thereafter called the Lucent tree, upon Terminus. We know little enough about Deity and Aeolos following the elves' arrival on Terminus, though presumably they came with their people to this new world. Due to the lack of information, it is fair to assume that neither of these two deities have descended. Little enough is known about the gods of the ogres themselves. However, their influence upon the ogre clans is undeniable. From their seat within Graven Hold, they gifted unto the ogres 7 tomes of war, artifacts of immense power that promised both unrivaled power and permanent defeat. Each of the 7 ogre clans on Gorak was given a tome that they were sworn to protect, but never open. Of interest is that these tomes still held much of their power even after their transference, with the ogre race, to Terminus. The lack of information about the ogre deities might lead one to assume that none of them have since descended. The Jinto deities have had more influence upon the world of Terminus than perhaps any other celestials. We know of one pair called the Infinite Union, Janavi the Bride Queen and Itero the Husband King. Itero, who suffered grievous injuries upon his transference to Terminus, was descended by Janavi in the hopes that this might stay the death inside of him. Unfortunately, his condition deteriorated even further, and he began corrupting the Jinto with his malady, creating the Revenant. Janavi recognized this corruption, and she herself descended, granting her very life essence to imbue the remaining Jinto with her power, creating the Remnant. These two opposing forces were the crux of the Deicide War, perhaps the most notable conflict in Terminus history. The story of the Mer deities is one of woe. When the Mer were thrown into the oceans of Terminus, it immediately became clear that her waters were inhospitable to their form. Neithir, the Mer god of battle, diffused his body, made of the waters of their native Isul, to create a safe sphere of water. However, this environ quickly mixed with the larger oceans of Terminus, and Sirenai, the original creator of the Mer, sacrificed her immortality, though she failed at first, likely due to the celestial boundary, to alter the Mer form so that they may survive on Terminus. The followers of Neithir, the Neithirian Red, believed this alteration to be a violation of their very bodies. They slew their goddess and retreated into the depths of the oceans, evermore searching for a way to undo this travesty and leaving the rest of their brethren to their sorrow. Isul, both the name of the original planet of the Mer and of its spiritual embodiment, has not been mentioned since the Mer arrival on Terminus. It may be true that she was not relocated with the Mer, as she was intrinsically tied to the planet itself. The creature Ermos may or may not be a god, though it seems more likely that he is a devil, and quite possibly native to Terminus, though that remains to be revealed. Of the Arkai deities, only 2 are explicitly known. The first is not a god of legends, but of nightmares. He is only called the Dark Celestial Lord, and he was the one responsible for the deconstruction of the Eowyn, a race of pure magical energy. The Arkai were then constructed from the remnants of this race by the Dark Celestial Lord's pawns on Roa. The archives of history have written of a second Arkai divine, a goddess called Haethys Kevgrejel. She betrayed her own race, descending during the Deicide War so she could serve under the Ravaging Lord and lead an army against the Frozen Sanctum on Whitethaw. After the turning of the war, she fled and has evaded any mention since. Though we can't be sure precisely how many human deities there is truly only one that earns significant mention, Osorry the Betrayer. It is likely the rest of the human pantheon has not descended beyond the celestial boundary. Osorry defaulted from the humans during the Deicide War, much like Haethys Kevgrejel, and led a great assault against the human capital of Havensong. Osorry's fury culminated in the slaying of King Amensal and the ordering of each stone of his grand city thrown off the cliffs of Rulun into the ocean. As the tides of the war turned with the arrival of the war wizards, Osorry was famously slain on the very ground from which Havensong once rose. The Halflings and their pantheon are relatively recent additions to the world of Terminus, and their character has yet to be tested by history. We do, however, know a fair amount about these deities from their time on Hirith, the Halfling home planet. We know that there were 6 wards, ostensibly gods, and that Kirin, the Ward of Flame, favored the Kiri, who would later come to be known as Halflings. The Kiri were not Kirin's charge, however, and he was banned from speaking to them by the other wards, though he was able to guide them in silence for a time. Such was his love for them that he granted them the gift of fire, called the First Magic, after which he faded into obscurity. Based on the lack of mention of the wards of Hirith on Terminus, we may reasonably infer that none of them have descended, as the act in and of itself has historically been noteworthy. It is also likely that the same laws on Hirith that prevented Kirin from interacting with the Halflings are absent, though were he to reappear, he would still be bound by the dragon accord. The Scar have but one god, Deshath, the Nine God. The reasoning for his title is up for debate, but his antagonism of the Scar, formerly called the Azajin, is not. He punished the race for the rape and pillaging of their homeworld, Deshath, with disfigurements and the inability to reproduce normally. This limitation has lifted for those Scar born upon Terminus, though the protrusion of their bones through their exoskeleton remains. Either due to inability, due to the celestial boundary, or complacency, Deshath has yet to intervene with the Scar's incessant warmongering on Terminus. The War Wizards, entities of mystery and debate, were the 6 godly beings to arrive on Terminus following Janavi's prophecy that the dark tide of Revenant would break beneath the sons of Terminus. It is said that these beings descended, one from each of the current, year 484 IH, pantheons, the dwarves, elves, ogres, dark mer, Arkai, and humans. This record can be interpreted either literally, in that one god from each pantheon literally descended to avail the mortals, or figuratively, in that the gods of each pantheon either blessed a mortal with great power or created a unique being with this power. Following the conclusion of the Deicide War, the War Wizards left the realm in what is called the Void of Mercy. And that just about covers what we know of the Divines of Terminus right now. I know it probably raised a lot more questions than it really solved, but such is the nature of the beast when we're in this pre-alpha stage. Thanks so much for watching, and for your continued support.